I am Vero, and this is Modern Immigrant. Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Modern Immigrant. I'm so happy that you're here on another Wednesday. Remember to check out our Instagram at Modern Immigrant and our website, modernimmigrant.net, so you don't miss any information or any new episodes. I just have to tell you that for this episode, you need to grab pen and paper and be ready to take notes because our guest of the week is sharing amazing tips, advice, information, and just a lot of different strategies that will help you overcome challenges during your immigration. Annie is our guest of the week. She's an immigrant coach that has been doing coaching work for over 8 years now. She's also an immigrant that moved from the Dominican Republic to the US to Idaho. We explore her immigration journey from the Dominican Republic, her divorce, and the impact that had in her immigration. And we also talk about how she helps other immigrants overcome challenges, navigate immigration, and just go forward even when things are not going well, even when we have a lot of things that we can't control. I think we all as immigrants can relate to the fact that sometimes things are gonna just not be ideal. Situations are not gonna be the best ones, but how can we still show up and do the best? How can we prepare for what we want in the future once we get our visa, when we get our paperwork? How are you gonna get ready for that? Annie gave us actionable and specific tools to gain confidence and navigate your immigration journey. So get ready for this interview, enjoy it, and remember to share with someone else if you found it helpful. Remember, we don't gatekeep here in Modern Immigrants, so go ahead and share with others if you liked it. Thank you so much for being here in another week. Enjoy this episode and all the information to follow Annie and to check out her Instagram, her website, and reach out to her if you want some extra coaching help down below in the description of this episode. Bye-bye. So I'm excited to start this interview. Welcome, Annie. I'm pronouncing your name correctly, yeah. Annie.
I mean, nobody knows. My mom named me Annie, and like the name is French. Americans pronounce it as Annie.
Okay.
And when I was growing up, everybody called me Annie because in Spanish we pronounce both N's. So
yes.
Whatever you want. I say Annie. So
I love that. I think this is how a lot of our interviews start because I think as immigrants, we have like different names and people, it's a struggle.
The names always have a story. And now I have this very white name. Like I always like to say that I surprise people when I walk into a room. They never expect me when they meet Annie Woods. They're waiting for like an 85-year-old white grandma. So
what do you think how is that entering a room? How does that make you feel? And welcome, by the way.
Thank
welcome,
you.
Annie, to Modern Immigrant. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Vera. I'm really, really excited to be here. And just walking into a room, I make it fun. To me, it's always fun and funny to have people like just see their faces and I'm not always scrutinizing. I will say that I'm not the type of person that's always looking for people's reactions, but sometimes you can just obviously see it.
It's just there.
Oh, you are the person that we did not expect to look like you or sound like you. Mm-hmm. Cool. So yeah, it's just fun and funny. It's always a good way to start a conversation. It gives you something to talk about right away.
That is true. I like that. Yeah, it gives you and sometimes people can connect in that way too. Like maybe it's a good surprise, right? It's like,
yeah,
this is awesome.
I will say in my experience, I've never had a negative experience with someone. Like when I walk into a room where someone's expecting someone, right? Yes. I might have had an experience when I walk into a room when nobody's expecting me and there's no context for my entrance.
Yes.
But yes, in general, it's very easy and good to have a name like mine living in the United States. So
it gives you, have you been able to experience like the privilege of having a very white name?
100%. So I guess that I had the gift of the contrast because my birth name is Annie Patricia Jimenez Rodriguez. And when I moved to the US and requested my social security number, it took them forever because nobody knew how they have inputted my last name. So we didn't know what was my middle name. We didn't know if they have hyphenated it or anything like that.
Right.
So when I got married and changed it and just took on my ex-spouse's last name, my life was just way easier. Just that the simple things of not having to spell my name every time I talk to someone.
Not even talking about what people think prior to, and like all of those expectations, but not having to have to explain yourself all the time.
Yeah, that I know is privilege, and I'm very grateful for it to an extent, and understanding that I just get to be grateful. There's nothing. It's something that I chose and that I could not, could choose not to have. Like I've had the opportunity to change my last name twice. Since, because I got a divorce, and when I changed it when I got married. When I got a divorce, they give you the chance to change your name again. And when I got my citizenship, they give you the chance to change your name again. But at that point, I've already built a business and a brand, and I was like, I'm giving this up. So
I'm not going back. Right. Yeah. And so your experience being in the US, so can you tell us, when did you move to the US? Like, when did your your immigration story start? If there's a starting point.
There is. I think that, there is a concrete date actually. So on March 2016, I moved here I'm a 90-day fiance. So
nice.
when I moved on March, I got married maybe a month and a half afterwards and started my process. I moved to Des Moines, Iowa, which is like the place that I never thought I would end up. I'm like, being from the Dominican Republic, I didn't even know where Iowa was until maybe a couple of years prior to moving, which is when I met my ex-spouse.
Okay.
And yeah, like a friend of mine had moved to Iowa, and I was visiting friends in the East Coast for Christmas. She was like, hey, just come over for my birthday. She bought me the ticket. I spent 48 hours in Iowa, met my ex-spouse.
What?
And then we had a long distance relationship for a while. And it was kind of like, if we really want to date, this whole thing of traveling from the Dominican to Iowa and vice versa is getting really expensive. So let's get married. And we did. So I got married in April.
What year? Sorry. I
got married in April 2016.
2016. Okay.
So I met my partner in 2014. In 2015, we decided to get married. I had a very easy process to an extent because I had been traveling as a tourist since I was 10. Okay. So there was not necessarily a barrier there for me to be like, oh, like there weren't a lot of questions around that.
Yeah.
So I'm also very, again, privilege. Like I understand the privilege of, like, I didn't immigrate, quote unquote, because I had to. I immigrated because I made the decision to be with a person, and I had the privilege that my parents had pathwayed for me since I was a little kid.
So
by having me travel since I was a kid. Like I remember when I was 10, I think that I knew that I was gonna be an immigrant when I was 10, and I traveled for the first time.
Wow.
Like, that was something that I like, oh, I am not from the place that I come from. For many reasons. So yes, that happened. We met in 2014. In 2015, decided to get married. 2016, we got married and started my immigration process, which was fairly serendipitous, fairly easy, and also gruelingly painful. So
yeah, tell us why.
For those that don't understand what being a 90-day fiance is, that means that you enter the United States with the condition of getting married in 90 days. Once you you have to plan a wedding, do all the whole thing in 90 days, just fine.
Sounds like a challenge.
Yes, it is a challenge. Yeah. I mean, I was
depending on the wedding.
Yes, exactly. I got married in a restaurant. We got like shots in the bar next door as a reception. Perfect. It was fine. And yeah. But once you start doing your process to become a resident, you will get a green card sooner rather than later, maybe like a year after or less. But that green card is conditioned to your marriage. So in order to remove the conditions, so that is a temporary green card that will have 2-year conditions. In 2 years, you can apply to get those conditions removed. you can apply to get these conditions removed as long as you're married and can prove that your marriage was in good faith. So everything was smooth. Everything was fine. I got my 2-year green card. I started working right away. Again, privileged that my parents paid for my English school. I was able to speak English and get like good jobs the moment I arrived. And everything was fun and giggle until I discovered that my partner had been like, my marriage had not been truthful from the beginning. Like there were lies, there were things that were happening that that didn't allow me to continue in it.
So over that period,
exactly.
Over
so like
2 years.
we got separated. We got separated in 2018.
Wow.
So right before I was supposed to apply for the removal of the conditions. So that was messy. We got separated. Yeah. But we still, and this is something like I'm very honest, my partner, even though we weren't together, my ex-spouse, he was like, okay, like whatever, like we didn't divorce. So we applied to remove the conditions, and everything was supposed to be great. And until March 2020, 15 days after we were all in lockdown, on March 30th, I was like, hey, I haven't heard back from USCIS. I don't know what's happening with my case. Like I haven't heard back from them. Like I should have heard back from them. Like it's been a year. And I call, and it turns out that they had sent me a request for further evidence the December prior that never arrived.
No. So it's been a year that you haven't proved or show this evidence to them.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like it's been 3 months. 3 months since then. But the thing is that the deadline to submit that evidence had passed 11 days prior. So the deadline was March 19th. All of this to say, like I was doing this all by myself because, of course, I got married. It's in good faith. Like on my,
it was an easy process. Yeah.
On my initial interview for my green card, the officer was like, "Oh, it's obvious that you guys are in love. Everything's fine." So the evidence that they were requiring were more of like the financial statements and things like that, and we didn't have all of that basically because, as I started realizing things in my marriage, I started separating, like started protecting myself. Definitely. So all of those things, we did have like social life experiences, photos of weddings and things that we have been going through, but that's not, aside from a life insurance policy, we didn't have a lot. Well, at this point, I am separated from my ex-spouse. I had during that time, because in the middle of our separation, I had no money. I didn't have anywhere to go. What saved me was that I built a strong enough community that I had a client that was such a good friend at one point that she's like, you can live with me. So I moved in with her family for 6 months until I was able to make money and get myself back on my feet. So March 30th arrives. I find out like I have a 30-minute breakdown. At that point, I'm dating somebody else, and they're like so worried about me and like life is over, whatever. But I'm having a breakdown, looking for a lawyer. I immediately
taking action.
Exactly. Yeah. So I immediately that afternoon called the lawyer. I interviewed with one. They were like, it's $250 an hour. I'm like, great, perfect, no problem, whatever, take my money. At that point, I had secured a good enough job that allowed me to say that. Good. Just again, things that not all immigrants can do or say. And yes, so that process starts, and it opens up a complete transformation of my life. At a physical and mental and emotional level, because now I'm having to go back and deal with the trauma of my marriage. My lawyer recommended that I filed for under an extreme cruelty clause to justify why I'm not filing with my spouse. Right. So in order to prove this, I had to go to therapy. I got diagnosed with PTSD. I mean, I had been going to therapy, but like I had to go to a specific therapist that could vouch for what I was saying. I had to ask my friends to write statements about my marriage, and like rereading all those things just like blew me up. And then on top of that is figuring out, at this point, I have a green card extension. I don't have an actual green card that's valid. So I don't know, like, if you're an immigrant and you're listening to this, you know how the anxiety that you experience just being out in the world and not being able to, breathe
freely,
safely until you have your papers. And just the idea, like, you can't get a traffic ticket, that like all of the little things that citizens of their country take for granted, and that you can't even imagine what it feels like.
It's a constant fear and anxiety. If something happens, I can leave the country. If something happens, I can go see my family. Like, it just, you're always hoping that nothing happens and that everything stays still, that's not life.
And all of this was happening during the coronavirus. So, like, things were happening, and they were happening fast. So I had a physical and mental breakdown. Basically, my body, I was always aching. I was very athletic during that time. Like, I did CrossFit religiously and Olympic weightlifting, but my body just couldn't keep up, because walking into a gym pushing my body to the point that would get my heart rate accelerated, mimicked having a panic attack.
Right.
So me putting myself in that position, my body didn't understand the difference. So I would walk into the gym and have a panic attack.
Right. Because like your brain doesn't know.
Exactly. And I learned so much about that body-brain connection, because I was in complete survival mode. If my phone rang, if an email came in from my lawyer's office, if an email came in from USCIS, everything would trigger me. If my ex-spouse would call me, I was like, fuck, what happened? Can I curse in here?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Please. We can share our immigration stories and not curse. I feel like.
Yes. So I was thrown into absolute survival mode. And then that also threw me into an unexpected healing path, because the conversation became, thank God for my therapist, God bless her. And I loved her, because she would welcome me into therapy. It's like, how are the things that you can control going? Because that was always the reframing. And that's like the basis of what I do now, is reframing that. How are the things that you can control going? And it became, okay, so who is my support system? It became a practice in vulnerability. I started learning to text my friends and be like, are you available for a hug? So that I could just drive there and be held. Call my friends to just come over and hold me. And I write a lot about how during the darkest times of my life, which I consider this to be so far, knock on wood, I found also the biggest joys, because I found support that I never imagined I would have. I've never felt as supported and as cared for and as held in my life as I did during that time. So I've also never grown as much as I did. Like, the amount of vulnerability required, the self-work that I had to do in order to get through those things, and learning, for example, to set boundaries with my Dominican family. Wow. So, like, is that like, right now I cannot hold your bullshit. I can't hold your bullshit because I'm dealing with a lot. So these are the new boundaries. These are the new rules of engagement. And that has also transformed my family dynamics.
And that in the Latinx community is so big, because we emigrate, a lot of us, and we carry still like that responsibility of our family. And we're dealing with so much in this new phase in our lives. That is the fact that you're talking about setting boundaries with them. I know a lot of people are going to connect with that, because it's like, okay, can I do that? Is that even allowed? Right.
It has, like, first off, yes, it's allowed, but you cannot arrive into a new country. I mean, we do. You can build a life in a new country holding on to the expectations of your old country. The therapist, Adam Grant, he wrote this phrase that I always just misquote, but it's something to the effect of, the purpose of humanity is not to be obedient descendants, but to be responsible ancestors. is we when we move with this idea of making our ancestors, parents, grandparents, our former society proud, we might miss on the opportunity of making the world a better place for those that are coming before us. And that is really the job of the immigrant. It's really to find a new pathway and to build, it's in my opinion, what we're here for. Like, we didn't come this far just to get this far. And the big thing that I focused on during those months was the building a life that was worth living, no matter what happened. That was like the big conversation, was it doesn't matter what happens, because, and this is where the uncertainty and anxiety comes in, this is still a human decision. Like, it doesn't matter how much paperwork, like, it doesn't really, even though the whole purpose is to like drown them in paperwork so that they don't have time to read it all. It's still a human that is going to eventually click a button that says yes or no.
Yes.
So I taught myself, with a lot of support, how to be okay even when things weren't okay.
Yeah.
How can I get through this? And even if I need to get back to my country, how can I build a life that will still be worth living? So that was like, that is the immigration story in a nutshell.
Very, very nutshell.
But yes, it was a transformational, painful, beautiful process.
And I'm guessing, because that was my next question, I'm really intrigued in finding out about your coaching career and your focus on helping immigrants. When did that come to be? When did you realize that that was your profession? Were you doing that prior to this kind of realization, or it was part of the transformation?
So both. And I've been a coach for 8-9 years now. I think I've been a certified coach, transformational coach. And I first and foremost, and I always will, I think, work with women. But then there's a point after I'm out of the dark, after I am able to see the light, I realize like, oh, all of my clients are immigrants. Yes. And that organically happened. And then I started doing some research, just like, who's helping us out? Who's talking about these things? And that's how I found you. And I see that there's some pages, some people that are talking about talking about sharing stories, and most are talking about the legal process, which is super important.
Yes.
But no one is currently, that I know of, talking about how to build a life, like how to develop the mental and emotional resilience to go beyond getting your papers.
100%. Yes.
So that's where
really connecting on another level. That's not just the legal. Like, I get people that reach out to me and they're like, how can I apply for this? And I feel like that's easy, and I'm quoting easy, because there's so many, like, you can send them a link. There's places that are helping immigrants for free in terms of the paperwork. And that whole process is super complex and difficult, but we need to talk about what are we feeling while we're going through that.
Yeah.
Right?
And not enough people talk about, and I'm going to be honest, not enough people talk about the struggle, and not enough people talk about the good parts. And I'm not only talking about, traveling and seeing the world and all that, but the growth process of this, and the fact that it's a mixed bag, and it will always be a mixed bag. But there are very specific things that I found, as people have been sharing their stories with me, are inevitable about the experience of immigration, the anxiety that comes with that, the physical ramifications of being an immigrant, of feeling your heart rate accelerate for no reason,
and developing disease. Like, a lot of people I have said here in the podcast, including myself, we have been experiencing this. Wow, I never had that until I moved to the US or somewhere else, right? Yeah. Like, now I have this autoimmune system disease, or now I suffer from this diagnosis, or now, and maybe we would have suffered the same in our countries. Maybe it's part of our genetics or whatnot, but there's a connection between mental health and physical health. There's a connection in trauma. Like, trauma can pass down so many generations, that maybe our own immigration is triggering that trauma from our ancestors, right? It's like, whoa, what are we doing now? We're breaking cycles. Exactly what you were saying. Like, we're here to break cycles and move forward. That's really difficult to do.
Yeah. And like the title of that famous book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
So that is also why one of my focuses is somatic healing, and in this sense, like I'm a yoga instructor as well, and I learned so much about the role of our nervous system, and it's just not fight or flight; it's also freeze and is fawn, and how do they come to be, and why as a society we focus so much with lowering stress when it's really about enhancing our response to stress. It's about having a balanced nervous system, not because, and then it's so obvious when you immigrate, the stress you can't do anything about. It's going to happen. It's going to be there. There's going to be emails. There's going to be calls. There's going to be ridiculous lawyer bills that are going to fuck you up. Yes. And how do you respond to that? It's what I do with my clients, and that's what I work on. Amazing. Is what is it that you are, how is it that you can understand your life as this thing that is within your control? And I always remind my clients, you did the hardest thing a human being could possibly do already. And I think that this is something that immigrants forget after they cross the border. They forget this superpower, this innate ability to risk it all, to do things that nobody else dared to do. And reminding them that this is like I understand how exhausting it is. I understand that if you feel like giving up a lot of the time, but it's also a function of who you are. And when you shut it down, when you start believing the internal dialogue and sometimes external dialogue that tells you that you're not enough, that people are not going to believe in you because you're an immigrant, they're not going to give you a job because you're an immigrant, they're going to find you out because you're an immigrant, your accent is going to negate some opportunities for you. When you start believing that, you start shrinking that part of you that pushed you to make the biggest sacrifice and the biggest step in your life. And that's what I want immigrants to always remember. You already did the hardest part.
Yes, we did.
Yes, like the other part is the longest part, but the hardest part is already done. Now, how do you get through the longest part? How do you get through those dark moments?
And I really love what you're saying, because I feel like as immigrants, sometimes there's so much that's not in our control. And I think this is part of like what I always like to explore is like, I have this idea of like, okay, we need to make a social change. There has to be a change at the policy level. There has to be a change at the very macro level in terms of immigration. Things need to change. But what do we do in the meantime, right? Like a lot of people get stuck there. It's like, oh, there's not a pathway to citizenship, so we're fucked. And it's like, okay, but there's a ton of undocumented immigrants living in the US. What are their options? Like, some people are doing that work, but what do we do in our everyday life? So the fact that you're talking about what can you do, what can you control, how can you approach a situation is going to change the outcome completely.
Yeah, it's going to change the outcome for you. And 100%, fuck immigration reform. We need it.
Please.
And it looks further and further away now since COVID. So for me, there are very quote unquote simple things that you can do in mind. And I say simple. And here's the word that I'm using is simple, not easy. Very specifically. Because simplicity is hard. Human beings will try to complicate everything.
Yeah, we have that talent.
Well, this is what we do. The easy thing is what ends up making our lives harder at the end. What I mean by that is this. What you can control simply is your health, especially if you move to the US. This is a very costly country to get sick in. being proactive about your health. And I'm not talking about weight control. I'm not talking about like, oh, you have to exercise 45 minutes a day. No, nothing like that. I am talking about getting attuned with your body and starting to listen to its signals, because chronic fatigue, chronic anxiety will have physical repercussions. So paying attention to what's going on in your body so that you can proactively address it, whether that is with gentle movement, because that's the thing. Like if I think about, when people think about health, I once did a post of me with my, like when I was lifting 260 pounds and all that fun stuff. I'm like, that was like the best shape of my life and the poorest health of my life.
Yes.
Because I was under so much stress that the only thing I could do was just go to the gym and lift weights, but that was destroying me and I was in constant pain. So understanding what my body needed at that time meant completely negating that and going to yoga, gentle movement, going on walks, and realizing that was my health.
Exercising less can be
exactly
the sign. Yes. Eating more. Sometimes people need to eat more food, and we think that health is not eating.
Exactly. When you and I understand that those stress signals are going to take your appetite away. So being proactive with your health is super, super important for emotional, mental, physical, and financial reasons.
And prevention. I love that you're touching on prevention, which is a thing that we don't talk about in the United States. Like here, when you have something hurts, you go to the doctor and then it's too late.
Yep.
We never get in tune with how we're feeling and checking in.
And feelings happen in the body.
Yes.
Feelings happen first in the body. Like when we say, where are you feeling it? That is in your body. You are thinking about something, but you're feeling it in your body.
Sure.
So health is one area of your life in which you have control, especially if you want to be preventive. The other area of your life is who and how you spend your time. And it's with whom you spend your time. And by this, I mean, and this is very nuanced and layered. It is really about what you're going to need. I personally, because I moved to Iowa, I did not have a large Latinx community to rely on. I had to build a community with the Emilys and the Whitneys and the Karens and the of the world. Redefining community for myself was super important. And how did I do that? By redefining who I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up. It was that moment of realizing I don't have to be the same person that arrived in this country, because the second I arrived in this country, I was not the same person. So what do I want to learn? So start taking classes. What types of jobs do I want to have? Start figuring out if there's an internship. And again, I understand privilege. I understand for undocumented people. So I want to be very clear and mindful that I know that this is not possible for everyone. But if at any level, even the smallest, it is possible for you, I would love for you to run with it. Volunteering someplace. Just joining a sports league, whatever that looks like. Finding spaces in which you could explore different facets of yourself will allow you to explore different possibilities in community. 100%. The person that I ended up moving with, that gave me shelter with her whole family, was the first person to ever talk to me at a networking event that I went to.
Wow.
And then she became a client, and then she became my landlord. And
those connections are so important when we immigrate, having people like that. Yes,
exactly. And it doesn't have to be only within your specific Latinx demographic community. Mm-hmm. That's another thing that I want to invite people to think about. Like, it's not only because we run the risk of staying stuck in the same mentalities if we are only sharing with people that have our exact same experience. So this is why it's layered and nuanced, and everybody should find what fits and feels right for them, but with whom you spend your time, because opportunities will open up for you as much as you're willing to open up yourself to opportunities.
That is, yes.
And people are opportunities.
100%. And you know what? It's interesting because in our countries, I recently heard this in a podcast. In our countries, we don't need to worry about any of this. We don't need to worry about networking. They were even saying, this were a podcast, they weren't even talking about immigration, but one of them said, I'm an immigrant. And I realized that when I emigrated, I had to learn how to make friends. Like we didn't you grew up in your community and you have friends that went to college with you in school and your parents' friends and your cousins, and that's it. It's all there.
It's circumstantial network.
Yes.
And
so you need to push yourself out.
It's moving from that circumstantial mindset to that intentional mindset.
Yes.
It's doing it on purpose.
And that's what's hard. And that's what being an immigrant is so challenging, but also it's so rewarding at the same time.
And the thing is that it's not as big as we might make it seem. And it's not that it's big. It's hard, especially if you immigrate like in your 30s, your 20s, or whatever. You have a set of belief systems are already there, and peeling the layers of that onion is hard. So start small and start easy.
Yes.
But the invitation that I have is see every connection as an opportunity. The way that I ended up in that networking event where I eventually met the person that gave me a place to live was because the organizer of that event, I purchased a pair of headphones from her a few weeks earlier on Facebook. And she went into my profile, saw that I was a coach, and she invited me to speak to that in that event.
Wow.
So everything, when you realize, when you're looking for opportunities, opportunities will show up. When you're looking for obstacles, obstacles will show up.
100%.
And I know there's discrimination. I know there is suppression. I know there are systems. I know all of that. But one thing, and I talk about it, my level of awareness of my privilege came when I moved to the US, because I come from a country, Latinx country, in which colorism is a thing. And in my driver's license, my Dominican driver's license, it says that I'm white. So I grew up with that privilege. And I didn't understand it until I became brown when I moved to this country.
Oh my goodness, it's so powerful what you're saying.
But here's the thing. The mindset that I grew up with allowed me to not focus on that shift. I always tell people, I walk into a room like I'm a middle-class straight white man.
We need that energy.
because that level of confidence, because that's how I grew up, because I didn't know that I wasn't until I moved here.
Same.
And you get to remember that when you look for those things, and I think that this is the immigrant advantage, I will say, we did not grow up, a lot of us did not grow up oppressed.
Yes. Yeah. It is an advantage.
We did not grow up with the oppression mentality. Meaning, and I used to work with Latinx and African-American kids at an institution in Iowa. And I refused, for example, to use the word minority with them, because I don't want them to look it up and see that minority is a person that's going to be discriminated against, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because what you believe about yourself, you will confirm in the world. So that's the mindset work that I work with my clients. So that part of who you relate to and what you do with your time is super important, because you are building new evidence of who you are.
It's so interesting what you're saying. Like, I always feel like I was more confident when I was back in Venezuela. I was way more confident than when I moved to the US. And what you're saying, it kind of helps me bring that battle back and be like, hey, that's still you. Like, that confidence still there. The thing is, I started to hear what the outside was saying about being Latina and about having an accent. And I started to believe that shit.
Yeah.
And somehow that of course that changes you and impacts the way you show up and enter a room, because you're already thinking, oh wait, they already think all of those stuff about me I never imagined people would think those terrible things about someone from Latin America. So it's so complex. I know it's complex, but it's so important what you're saying, that we start to like bring those things back to our life.
Yeah. We need to build the evidence of who we want to be. because and that is with action. It's not with reading books. Reading books is great. It's with doing the fucking thing. So I've had a couple of clients, a few clients, and people that just are in my audience on Instagram that will start with, it's like, I've been here in the country for 5 years and I've never had gotten my driver's license. And I'm like, bitch, what are you waiting for? Like, did you drive where you were from? Yes. Go get your driver's license. That sadly is not there's a triangulation that I always like to think about. We think it's thoughts, so your mindset, your body, and it's like your posture, your thoughts, and your words. So a lot of people want to change the thoughts before they change everything. And sadly, it's not always so. It's possible.
Right.
It's not always the fastest route. If you do something differently, even if it's scared, you will immediately change your thought because now you have evidence that you are capable of something else.
Yeah.
So what changes us is taking different actions. And once again, you already took the biggest freaking action you could have possibly taken by leaving your country. What the fuck? Like wake up.
And that's why it's so powerful. And I'm sure you do a lot of these exercises in your practice, but I have been learning with this podcast that it's really powerful for people to look back at what they have done. Like some people reach out to me after an interview and they're like, whoa, just sharing my story helped me realize, like, list the things that you have done and even write them down. Because you're like, oh, what? I left my country. I learned a new language. I applied for school. I learned how to drive in a different, so from the little things to the big ones.
Yeah.
I think we need that reminder. We really do.
Celebrate yourself, but that means paying attention to what you can control. What distracts us from seeing those accomplishments is always focusing on what could go wrong, the things that are outside of our control. So even if it's just taking a little bit of time in the morning and writing down, what I like to do, I'm going to share my gratitude practice with you. In the morning, I'm an avid journaler. I think I'm on my journal number 26 since I moved to the US. And I end all of my journal entries with a gratitude practice, and it's 3 very specific things. And it's always related to the day prior. So from the day prior, I am grateful of one thing that happened that I had no control over. So something that happened for me. That reminds me that the universe has my back. It's like this thing happened and I had nothing to do with it. It can be as simple as I am grateful that my coworker took up this project for me. Right. Or that they fixed the AC in my apartment, whatever that is. It's like, oh, I am supported. The second thing I am grateful for is something that I did for myself. I am grateful that I was my word and went on that walk. I am grateful that I rested like I said I would. I am grateful that I busted my ass for 48 hours to finish that project, whatever that is. Yes. And the third thing is something that I am working towards. So I am grateful for this thing. And I write it in present tense. I am grateful for, let's say, if you're working towards getting a promotion, making the next amount of money, saving money. I am grateful for the $5,000 I've saved. And that can be like the same one until you reach that goal.
Right.
Just as a reminder to you that those things, when you put your heart and your mind towards, they're going to happen. So is that refocusing? How can you refocus on the things that are really ground yourself in the present and build that gratitude? Because it's being an immigrant, we always think that we need to be grateful to our welcoming country. I have a friend that is currently going through a very tough immigration process, and it's very complicated. But the one time that she finally started expressing herself about how she was feeling, she kept saying, like, I don't want you to think that I'm ungrateful. I'm not ungrateful. And I'm like, hey, I'm not.
It's okay, right?
Like, dude, this is bullshit. Like, this is hard. You get to be pissed off and sad and anxious and all of those things about that. But you get to be grateful to yourself. Yes. Because you are into your body, because you are getting yourself through this.
And because we're the only ones that are actually doing the work. The country's not doing anything. Sometimes, in some cases.
Yeah,
right?
you got yourself here, you submitted the paperwork, you're paying the lawyer, you're getting the, what are you grateful? Like, you are doing the thing.
Exactly. And just releasing that guilt, I love it, because I think we have all felt like that. Like, oh, I shouldn't complain because this country, it's like, it's okay to complain sometimes. And it's also okay to recognize the things that have been positive too, and that have been good.
So
there's a balance. Nothing is completely one side or the other, or black or white, or, there's grace.
and life is the grace. Like, the reality is the grace. Immigration is gray. Yeah. And this is why we can never tell anybody else's story, because we all have a very different experience of this country. Like, I know that even when I know that I've been very blessed and very lucky. And because of the privilege that I experienced way before I moved to the United States, I was able to build a confidence and a toolkit that allows me to, quote unquote, thrive in this country. Mm-hmm. That a lot of people feel that it's just a maze that you can navigate. Just the fact that I ended up in Iowa,
right?
It's a blessing, because first, like, I have more grind and more grit than most people in Iowa, just by the fact that I'm an immigrant. That is the immigrant advantage. Yes. But also, at a legal and at an immigration status standpoint, ain't nobody asking me if I married for love. Like, you ended up, like, you left a tropical paradise to move to Iowa. You are in love, girl.
Exactly.
Had I moved to California, had I moved to Florida, had I moved to New York, that process would have been a nightmare.
So different.
Because there's a million Dominicans in New York. And there's a lot of people that get married for papers. So they have to scrutinize more.
Oh my God, that's so true. Yes.
So if anybody's here thinking about immigrating, think about a small town. It might be to your benefit.
Yes, for real. Yeah. And maybe you see that also, like, I don't know, like the fact that we need to understand, and by hearing stories like yours, it's always so important for me to understand that things can be temporarily. Like, things are not, that's not going to be your life forever necessarily. Like you move to a place that maybe you didn't see yourself there in the long term, and you get to move once you're more stable in your immigration. That's going to happen. I promise it's going to happen. Sometimes we feel like that terrible moment, it's forever. It's forever. And it's really not. Like, just look back at a difficult moment in your life. It passes.
Yeah. So, but when our minds and brains are hijacked by all the nasty juices of survival mode, when your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight, is activated, it's hard to see it that way, but you get to work on seeing it that way. Right. And there's just so many things that we get to do, because the life that you have right now is the life that you dreamt of, maybe with a few more hiccups a couple of years ago. Yes. And that is the part of, like, one of the biggest pitfalls that I see immigrants make, or the biggest mistakes that I see immigrants make, is that they put their lives on hold until they get their papers. Yes. And it's like, well, it's so, and I just ask, so when you get your papers, what's going to be different?
I mean, I know the motivation that you don't have right now. Are you going to have,
like, I know you're going to be able to vote if you're becoming a citizen, and you're going to be able to work for 10 years without having to renew your paperwork if you're becoming a resident. Yeah. Because we all know that a green card is just a glorified work permit. Yeah. That's all there is. Yeah. So what is it that you're doing with your precious fucking life until you get a piece of paper?
I have met so many friends, sorry to interrupt you, but it's so true. Like, I have met so many friends that they didn't work towards what they wanted in terms of their professional career, or just in general in their life. And once they got their green card, everything stayed the same. They were still doing the job that they didn't like, that they were able to do prior to the green card. They did it, they stay with the same person, they stay at the same city, so nothing really changed. And they were waiting for that one thing too.
Yeah, because that's a golden ticket.
And it's like, you could have been working towards other things.
You could have been taking a class, you could have been looking for a promotion, whatever.
Yeah.
So that is
That's interesting.
That sometimes is heartbreaking for me when I say like, oh, why are you up to? Just waiting for my paperwork to come through. To do what with it? Like, what is it? Like, what's the vision? And a lot, and I know that, again, this is for a subsection of immigrants. I mean, if you left your country fleeing violence, fuck yes, wait for your paperwork.
Yeah, don't listen to this.
Yeah, rest.
Yes.
Fucking rest. But if you left your country in a somewhat comfortable status, as in, you know that you have a home to come back to if you need to. If you left because you wanted a better life and you're not building that life and you're putting that responsibility on somebody else's hands, that to me is heartbreaking. So I love it. I love to like, we are hustlers, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond the hustle. It goes beyond working 3 jobs. It goes to living a life that is quality. So defining what your quality of life is. It doesn't mean you're going to be making 6 figures in the year, but it means that you're spending more time with your kids. Does it mean that you're getting in shape? Does it mean that you're reading more books? Does it mean that you're actually getting sleep?
Right.
Whatever that looks like, define your own success. A lot of what happens is that we bring somebody else's definition of success through our immigration process.
Usually,
we bring our parents, like, and all of our friends just think that we're making it big. We should be successful, whatever their definition of success is. And one of the most liberating things that I got out of my immigration was the ability to define myself and define success. The possibility of not wanting to be able to say out loud, I don't want a regular job. I don't need $1 million. I don't want to be famous. I don't like what do I want? I want to be able to read books all as much as I want to. I want to be able to live in peace and in a place where there's not
to have more opportunities to travel or to work less. Like, how many times sometimes we don't even imagine that we can get to ask for these things, right?
Yeah, but the thing is that why did you leave?
Exactly.
Yeah. If you're not gonna ask for them, if you're not gonna make it happen, why did you leave? That's that's where it comes back to, and it's like the real question. It's like, why?
Yeah.
Why did you leave? And it's not like, it's like, for, and I would rephrase that. For what? For what did you leave?
Yes.
Not the reason because, but rather what were you striving for? And we forget that in the process. So always holding on to that for what. And that for what can change.
Totally.
But the point is to always be going back to that, to guide your actions. And
reframe it, as you were saying. We're going to change and things are going to change. And I think it's so wonderful what you're sharing, and so many, like, I was going to ask you for like one thing to help us, and you have given us so many amazing tools and just places where to start. But I really would like for people to know where they can connect with you. How will these services look like? If somebody wants to reach out to you, I would really encourage everyone to do it, because and to have more spaces like the ones you're creating, I think are really needed as well.
Yeah. Well, online on the Insta, you can find me. Actually, all of my social handles are the same. Annie P. Woods. Annie like the orphan, P like Paul, Woods like the golfer. And right now, and this is a cool thing, I'm exploring just the content creation side of things and the coaching. We're doing one-on-one coaching and seeing what that turns into. I have a vision for a community. I have a vision for a space, but I want a space that is self-nurturing, not a space, because my dream is to have time, and it's not in my personality to always have one place to be all of the time.
Right.
So I want to shape that, and I want that to become what it gets to become, and just provide people with resources and provide people with ideas and ways in which they can themselves become their own coaches. Because that is one thing that I am a firm believer in. I believe that we get to be self-starters in our lives, and once we have tools, we get to use them. So it's never overwhelming. Working with me, for example, is never, these are 10 tools that you're going to use. Every day we go to what is the tool that is best going to serve you right now, and we're going to practice it for as long as you need to, until you don't need to.
Like, that's the goal. Exactly.
That's the goal. The goal is as a coach, my goal is for people not to need me. Exactly. And I also understand that coaching for immigrants specifically can be cost prohibitive. So but just like therapy, my vision is to put out as much free content and as much free resources and as much connecting opportunities so that people will be self-sufficient. Like I'm loving, I've seen so far 2 accounts of people that are working financials with immigrants. I'm like, yes, let's talk about that. Let's make people financially resilient.
Yes.
Because we need to, like, I want to see millionaire immigrants. 100%. I want people to not be in survival mode. So that's even like, if I have to work with clients, I'm like, what are your finances looking like? And is that the priority right now? Because it's all about us feeling safe where we're at. So find me on the Insta, find me on other social medias, and yeah, let's connect. If you're looking for a one-on-one coach, that's awesome. If not, let's see what we can come up with.
I love it. And I'm going to leave all the links down in the description so people can go and find you and check them out. And even just looking at your page on Insta makes me already feel better. So like, I feel like that's a great point where to start. Like, follow accounts that make you feel good, that are talking about things that are relevant to you, that are empowering you, that are real and honest. And I think, and yeah, like just connecting and building that community. So thank you so much, Annie, for what you have built, for the things you're speaking up about, and for being here in Modern Immigrant. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Vero.
This was awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.